Hi, everyone. So the Slido question, the QR code, feel free to ask any questions. And I just want to give a heads up that this is not an easy talk. And I'm going to share my own story. But first, I would like to know, how many of you got burnt out? Oh my God. I did not expect so many raised hands, but I'm sorry and I'm happy that you guys are going to relate, hopefully, to what I'm saying. Hi, my name is Irina, and I experienced and overcame burnout. I'll never forget the day when I suddenly quit in July 2020, after which I had a therapy session in which my therapist said, "No wonder you quit. You were quite burnt out for a while." To which I said, "I was. This is burnout." I was genuinely shocked. I thought burnout was going to be this big dramatic meltdown. I mean, how did I not know this? Why did I feel so blindsided? And why don't we talk about this? Why is this such a surprise? I mean, I quit my job because I didn't want to get out of bed. I was constantly exhausted no matter how much I slept. And in fact, I wasn't sleeping very well either. I was extremely irritable and negative at work, and I couldn't focus on doing basic things. And the weirdest thing was when I was forgetting things. Like I remember one day, I sat in front of my computer and I couldn't remember my password. I was like, what is going on? Is this amnesia? It's like my brain refused to work. During my healing journey from burnout, I made a commitment to myself to never repeat the experience again. Because here's the thing, my burnout didn't result necessarily from working long hours all the time and not doing self-care. It was something else, and I wanted to understand what was it. So after hundreds of hours of reading everything I could get my hand on at the time, and this was 2020, when burnout still wasn't, I think we're more burnout literate now, but in 2020, it was still not very well researched or understood, especially not in tech. So after reading everything I could and reflecting back on my own experiences, I figured out my answers. And hoping it can help others, I wrote a 4-part in-depth series that's how the Caring Techie was born, because I wrote about burnout. The response was overwhelming. So many people reached out and say, "Me too, thank you for telling me that there's nothing wrong with me." So the problem is more widespread than I thought. But no, this is not a talk about me, nor a talk about my newsletter. My experience corroborated with research shows that burnout is not an individual issue, but an organizational one. In other words, dysfunctional organizations burn people out. So today's talk is not about blaming, accusing, criticizing. Today's talk is what can we as leaders do to prevent burnout in our people. And before we move on, no organization is perfect, and I know that, and I'm not asking for perfection, I'm just asking for improvements. But why should you care about this? Well, data shows that the burnout is on the rise. Year over year, more people report experiencing burnout. And the thing is, burnout is expensive. And so preventing burnout is a business conversation that we need to have. So let's talk about the costs. First of all, we have the productivity costs and the quality of work costs. Burnt out employees produce less work and worse work, basically. And that's also based on data. And then burnt out employees usually quit. So that comes with employee turnover costs like recruiting, onboarding. And then there are the costs that are harder to quantify, like knowledge loss, context lost, history, right? Tribal knowledge. So that we don't talk about that enough. And then there are also the costs on employee morale and the damaged reputation for the company, because it's going to be harder to attract talent in a company that's known to burn people out. But let's start with understanding burnout, because this is key in understanding how to build anti-burnout organizations. Again, this talk is not about me giving you answers of how to fix burnout. It's about me teaching you frameworks and how to think about solving the burnout problem. So understanding it is key. The World Health Organization defines burnout as a syndrome resulted from chronic unmanaged workplace stress. And I underlined the keywords, which is chronic, unmanaged, and stress. So stress alone doesn't cause burnout. It's the fact that stress combined with inadequate support and resources over an extended period of time that cause burnout. Some of the symptoms are the ones that I described to you. Other ones are apathy, loss of hope, decreased professional ability, feelings of decreased professional ability, dread, this not feeling connected to your work, mood issues, sleep issues, stomach issues, all of the above. And these are important because we're going to integrate them in step 2 of the framework. And so based on my research, I came up with this burnout equation. So if burnout is this generalized exhaustion, then we have physical and mental exhaustion combined with emotional exhaustion and poor recovery equals burnout. And then I thought, okay, but so what causes this exhaustion? Like, where is it coming from? And I realized there are internal factors that contribute to it, like personality traits, attitudes, and behaviors. There are also external factors like work environments, leadership, and culture. So just by looking at this equation, you can notice multiple things. First of all, burnout is a problem on both sides. I also played a part in my own burnout, and I know that. But it wasn't just me. And if you look closer, there are multiple paths to get to burnout, right? So not everyone's burnout looks the same. And then the other thing is leadership plays a part. So the question is, if we want to fix burnout, we as leaders need to be part of the solution instead of the problem. And so how can we be that? Let's look again at the equation. If we look at this equation and we ask ourselves, how are organizations causing chronic stress? And how are we supporting people in managing their stress? This is going to help us figure out what we have to do. And so, again, based on research, these are some of the dimensions that contribute to burnout. Like organizational factors that aggravate and contribute to causing burnout. Number 1, culture. There are studies that show that cultures where psychological safety is lacking, accountability, where trust is missing, creates a base layer of stress that, compounded with other stresses, leads to burnout. So that's one dimension. Second is management. Micromanaging, as well as the opposite, where managers are very hands-off and uninvolved. Managers that don't provide the right support. Managers that don't provide clear role expectations or feedback. The guessing game is extremely stressful, not really knowing whether you're doing okay or not. Then the other thing is pressure, motivating through pressure. I don't know if you guys have heard of the wartime. Oh God, I hate it. That's completely unhelpful. When people are already working their asses off, and then you add wartime, that's unhelpful, so not good. Performance management, not managing low performers, is also stressful because guess who's going to pick up the work? The most competent people, right? Glorifying burnout-prone behaviors, promoting people who consistently work 12 hours a day all the time and promoting only those ones. It's not really helpful. Workload, ever-changing roadmap and priorities, unreasonable timelines, chronic staff shortages are famous. And then honorary mention, tech debt, poor on-call health, and constant firefighting, projects that don't see the light of day, that causes what's called as learned helplessness. And that's also a burnout precursor. Process overwhelm, which we're going to talk about more, and fear of job security. All the looming layoffs are extremely stressful. So what is the solution? What can we do? I came up with a 5-step framework that any company can use to install systems of preventing burnout. These steps are, step number 1, committing to becoming anti-burnout. I'll explain why each of them is important. Step number 2, measuring and assessing. Step number 3, creating a game plan. Step number 4, taking action on this plan. And then step number 5, monitoring and repeating. So step number 1, becoming anti-burnout. This needs to start with treating burnout as a systemic issue rather than a personal problem. And what this means is leadership needs to publicly acknowledge the concern for burnout, making it a priority, and committing to preventing burnout publicly. In this step, creating resources to educate about burnout symptoms and causes is very important. So it starts with raising awareness and communicating that we, as an organization, care about this. The reason why it has to start with us is because it cannot start with employees. And I'll explain in step 2 why burnout, for example, is underreported. Step number 2, measuring. We're data-driven individuals, so why not tackle burnout with the same mindset? Why don't, instead of assuming what the problems might be, why don't we ask our people what the problems are? So what we want to know is what are the issues and who is at risk for burnout or already burning out. Research shows that it's not everybody that gets burned out. It's the most conscientious, the most empathetic, the most highly ambitious people that get burned out. And it's not a solution to stop hiring those people because those are the people you want on your team. So how do we measure? Number 1, employee surveys. They must ensure anonymity or else people fear retaliation. Burnout is underreported because it's a shameful conversation. How would you go to your manager and say, I'm feeling less capable and competent. I don't know if I can do my job. I'm feeling very negative. Also, how do you know that they're not going to use this information against you? Especially in a culture where there's no trust. So that's why, unless it's anonymous, these surveys might not have the rate of completion you need. One-on-ones are also a good place to collect signals, but it's not as formal as, like, the data is not as nicely packaged as a survey. Third, you can organize listening groups, maybe facilitated by a third party. And lastly, exit interviews. Nobody takes advantage of the data that they get in exit interviews. It's an underutilized signal. So what do you want to measure in these surveys? It's the dimensions you already talked about. Well-being, relationship to work, relationship to the manager, culture, how do they feel regarding their workload, and how do they feel regarding the process. Here are some of the questions. I mean, the survey has to be obviously more in-depth, and we're not going to go through all of these. But some of the questions you might want to ask. Does your work leave you feeling exhausted? Have you lost the energy and enthusiasm for your job? Where was it? Do you think that nothing you do at work makes a difference? That's a big one. Are you neglecting yourself? What's not included here is obviously, like, do you sleep well? Like, is your body okay? Because burnout is also a physical experience. Step 3, make a game plan. Take an honest look at the assessment results. Different organizations might have different problems, so it doesn't make sense to come up with a generalized plan. But look at what dimensions need help. And I'm gonna mention after this some of the suggestions that I have. But so in making a game plan, you want to figure out what the action items are, create a timeline, both short-term and long-term, and communicate the plan across the organization. What this does is it builds accountability, right? The fact that organizations are communicating, we care about burnout, we want to help fix this, and here's how we're planning on doing it. This also helps destigmatize the talk about burnout, right? Do not simply pile on a bunch of perks. So we've all seen this: meditation apps, gym memberships, take a vacation. This is not going to solve burnout unless you have to go to the root causes, not Band-Aid over Band-Aid. And so next, we're going to talk about some of the actionable changes you can implement. This is not a full list. It's not a perfect list. Take what works and throw away what doesn't. But it has to start with incentives, because incentives drive behaviors. I've said this before, and I'll say it again: incentives drive behaviors. So you have to discourage unhealthy workloads. So unless people can demonstrate sustainable effort towards something, that's the type of effort you want to reward, the sustainable one. Second, you can incentivize your managers to prevent burnout. Make it their job. Sure, I'm not suggesting just throw another thing on the manager's plate. But if managers are only incentivized to deliver at any cost, then burnout, that's how burnout happens, right? When you prioritize delivery at any cost above the well-being and sustainability of the effort. And also, culture. This is outside of the scope of this presentation, and it's a very difficult one, and it can take years. But you want to build a culture of psychological safety, where people feel listened to and heard, where it's okay to speak up and say, hey, I'm not, like, I need a mental health day. I'm struggling. But you have to create that safety for people to speak up. And with that comes culture of accountability, a culture of trust, a culture of transparency, where we don't sweep issues under the rug and we don't gaslight people. And so the changes start at the top, where leadership needs to model the behaviors that they want to see. So what I mean by that is, for example, self-care. Leaders and self-care and boundaries are some examples, not all of them. Accountability is a big one. I mentioned it again, but managers need to be held accountable. For example, with behaviors like micromanaging or negligence. If your managers are micromanaging and you don't do anything about it, don't be surprised if your employees are burning out. But I don't think managers wake up and are like, I want to burn out all my employees today. I'm pretty sure that's not the case. And so how can you help these managers build the skills that they need to not be those managers that burn people out? So what are the support systems you can create for them? And some of the solutions are coaching and peer support, peer groups. Sometimes managers just want to talk to other managers and brainstorm ideas. And that's a zero cost. That's a zero cost solution. Some other changes, cleanup. For example, did you know that many people, when they have very scattered meetings, many engineers will wait until the end of the day to get their work done, and so they will work long hours. So this is such a low-hanging fruit in my opinion. How can you protect your people's times and give them the control over their time? And that means consolidating meetings, defragging their calendars, and also increasing meeting efficiency. Like, do they really have to attend certain meetings? Or can they just opt out and read the notes, get the summary, right? The other one is access process. This is kind of generic, but what I mean by this is when builders have to write all these documents, and don't get me wrong, I'm pro documents, I'm pro documentation and everything. But when it's in excess, that's taking away time from the actual work that already needs to be done, right? It needs to be done anyway. Another improvement that can be made here is to switching to asynchronous or bursty communication. Like, instead of sending one message now, one message in 1 hour, just like batch it. And as I mentioned, flexible schedules. In order for people to not feel stressed about their work, they need blocks of time that they can just focus, deep work. Another change that you can make is building systems of support. And I mentioned this before, destigmatize talking about burnout and stress. It has to start with that. Other things are creating moments of connection between people. Studies show that loneliness exacerbates symptoms of burnout and lets them go longer unnoticed for longer. Other things you can do is provide mental health benefits and access to counseling or therapy. Similar to managers, peer groups for peers is also another great opportunity to help people manage their stress. This is, if you think about the equation, where we're in the poor recovery phase, right? So these systems of support are meant to help people recover better. And then lastly, build spaces to rest. We need to rest more in order to not burn out. And then lastly, okay, boundaries. So boundaries are very important because people need to disconnect. If people cannot disconnect, even if they go home, they're still not going to recover from stress. So boundaries, these are the guardrails that we need to allow people to fully disconnect. And some of the suggestions are defining clear working hours, defining meeting availability, clear meeting availability, actually taking time off and not responding to emails or any messages, and also allowing people to not install, do not install Slack or emails clients on their phones. I know this is crazy, but the problem with not disconnecting is they take work with them on their phone. Like, I leave the office and I'm still at work, right? And it's worse if you work from home, right? Taking care of your people, especially the burnout prone ones, now knowing that which people are more burnout prone than others, you can remind them to take care of themselves and preventing them from taking on too much work. Because they're going to be the ones like, sure, I'm going to take this as well. I want to do this as well. So you can coach them to know their limits. And then creating stability. Reorgs are very damaging. It's not the reorgs, it's the frequency. Frequency of changes. Frequency of changes in the roadmap. Frequency of changes in the organizational structure. Try to avoid that as much as you can. Again, not avoiding them, but limiting the frequency. All right, next steps 4 and 5 are pretty straightforward. Implementing the plan, start small, one thing at a time. Know that it's going to take time, but also know that any incremental progress matters. And then keep yourself accountable by providing regular updates. Then step 5 is monitoring. You might have thought, okay, burnout is eradicated, goodbye. But then you keep having new people coming in, right? New employees. You have to make sure that this is something that is maintained. So periodic surveys and one-on-ones are key here. So we've covered a lot, and I want you to remember this. First of all, the burnout is a systemic issue. It is not an individual problem. It is not someone not taking enough time off. So that's a thing of the past. Second, preventing burnout is a business conversation. This is more than just nice and warm and fuzzy work culture, happy people, la la la. No, we're talking about money. And third, there's no one-size-fits-all solution to fix burnout, but in order to understand what you need to do, you have to look at the definition, ask yourself those questions, and implement this 5-step framework. Committing to becoming anti-burnout, asking your people and measuring the current state what you're dealing with, making a plan, implementing the plan, and monitoring once things are better, or to check whether things are better. And that is it. Thank you for listening. Also, I wanted to say that I am hosting a roundtable at 2 p.m. I'm not sure exactly which table, but if you have more questions or want to discuss more, that's also another avenue.
Thank you, Irina. Wonderful talk. Wonderful talk. I mean, there was so much information out there, and I remember talking to Irina, 2.5 years ago about burnout, and she was at that point just collecting information to kind of like compile the reasons for burnout and all that sort of stuff. So there's a lot of information that's come out of it, and I can see the amount of effort that's kind of gone into there. So thank you for doing this. We'll start getting into the questions side of things. We may not have the time to kind of go through all the questions. We'll see how much we can kind of get through. So the first one here, the most voted one, what would be your suggestion for dealing with burnout in teams that have to be on call, say like DevOps or SRE?
Yeah, so I've been on call multiple times, and I had to do the 2 a.m. wake up time. And I actually took some initiatives in my org at the time to improve. So what's really stressful is not necessarily the waking up or the being paged. What's stressful is also waking up at 2 a.m. and not knowing what to do. So we took an initiative to revamp all the run books and make it super easy for people to deal with that. The other thing we were doing is we had weekly meetings where we would go through all the alerts, and we would decide, is this an alert that should have paged or not? Are there action items that need to be taken as a result of this alert? And so this is beyond what's the word I'm looking for? Mitigating. Beyond mitigating. This is like, how do we make this alert not happen again? What is the problem behind this alert? So the efforts should be make the life of the on-call easier, because we cannot remove on-call. That's just a given. And there are teams that are small enough that do not have SREs. And that was my case. And I was supposed to be on call on not even my code base, not even my own systems. So my tools were runbook. I had to know how to go get the error logs. I had to go look at the metrics. And so make the life of the on-call as easy as possible. And then try to reduce the reason why they get paged. And same with incidents, like postmortem culture and everything. That's also part of the answer.
Just to add on to that, maybe something that I've seen from my experience also is giving some comp time off for folks who've been constantly on call for like an on-call cycle sort of thing?
Absolutely. I think, especially with people who get waken up during the night, they are it's very unlikely that they're going to be productive the next day. So, and also I think maybe planning for that can help during sprint planning for the people who get to be on call, to just give them a lighter load.
Cool. Going to the next highly voted one here. What can you do if senior leaders are not willing to commit to an anti-burnout organization?
You're not going to like my answer. You can't fix it. You can't fix it on your own. This is not something that's bottom up. If they are not bought into the cost benefit, that's above your pay grade. I'm sorry. So I'm suggesting find a place where they care about these things.
Agreed. Quit. All right, going to the next one here. How do you balance the drive for high performance in tech organizations with the need to prevent burnout among team members?
Yeah, this is great. So again, no one size fits all, but I consider myself as a high performer, right? But there's a difference between high performing and overachieving. And we need to know, and we need to be defining what's good enough and celebrating that. Like, we have achieved what we wanted, and that's fine. Instead of in our heads be like, no, but I want to do more, but like we have to do more. So what is high performance? Because it can't be the chase of like more all the time, right? So it has to be the balance of, these are our goals, we can exceed them, but we can't just be like never enough, never good enough. And so celebrating I think, and this is going a lot in the internal factors, right? In how we think, in the mindsets of the individuals and how they think about success. And this combined with like good habits and good boundaries and good disconnect. Like, you can high perform during your 8 hours. You can work more, obviously, but you don't need to always be doing that to be a high performer. And in fact, rested people produce better results. I think it's an illusion that people who work long hours all the time do better. And so how do you create a culture or habits, daily habits in your team to achieve that?
True that. One of the things that Irina kind of brought up in her presentation also was knowing to say no.
Yes.
Right? At some points, you're like, our milestone was to get this. We don't have to do like a stretch milestone. Starting to say no is a good thing.
That's literally the title of my latest article.
All right. Going to the next one here. To what extent can or should managers be assessing burnout if they are lacking professional education? How to detect situations when professional help is needed?
If I understand this question correctly, maybe you can help me. Lacking professional education, meaning lacking the knowledge that they need to do their jobs? Or how do you interpret?
I kind of took it as like the professional knowledge of knowing burnout or the psychology behind it and all that sort of stuff.
I think this can be part of management training, and I think it should be part of management training. It's called burnout literacy, like know the symptoms. It can be just a module in the management training that people do. And obviously would help if managers have peer support, right? They can be like, hey, do you think this person's burning out? Like, they can ask people's advice around them. It's just how do you help your report, right? How do you connect them with the resources that they need?
Cool. We'll take one more here. What is a non-obvious way to know burnout is a problem in your company?
I mean, none of these are obvious, I think, in my opinion. Non-obvious way to know burnout is a problem. Well, the problem is we're not measuring it, and there are not enough studies. And so if we don't look at it, like, we can't know. And so I feel like it's a problem where we would rather just turn around and not look at it. And so hope this answers your question.
Cool. Thank you once again, Irina, for a very engaging conversation here with burnout, a subject that not too many people have researched so far. But thank you for taking the effort and coming up with all these slides and the learnings that you have found throughout the years. But thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Melby.